For 5 centuries, the Galactic Concord had curated peace with the meticulousness of a gardener tending a bonsai. Theirs was a tranquility built on selective pruning, on the careful removal of inconvenient histories and unruly species. Civilizations that had once warred for stellar dominance now debated trade tariffs in shimmering halls of polished chrome and biotic crystal, their ancient grievances smoothed over, redacted, and forgotten. The Concord's memory was long, but its archives were ruthlessly clean. Humanity was a footnote in those archives, a single sterile entry under the heading Species File 734, Societal Collapse, Self-Inflicted. They were a cautionary tale told to young delegates, a race of brilliant, volatile primitives who had reached for the stars with one hand and a lit match with the other, immolating their homeworld, Earth, and its fledgling colonies in a storm of civil war before the Concord could even extend a formal welcome. It was a neat, tragic story, and like all the Concord's most effective narratives, it was a lie. The truth was quieter, colder, and locked away on a quarantined moon named Epoch, the last reservation of the human experiment, a place the galaxy had been taught to forget. Ilara was a product of that forgetting. Her world was the quiet hum of atmospheric processors and the hushed rustle of pages, both digital and paper, in Epoch's central archive. She was a keeper of curated dust, a librarian of lies. The official history was her daily bred humanity's hubris, its fall, the Concord's benevolent quarantine to protect the last survivors from their own self-destructive nature. She'd read it, cataloged it, and recited it 1,000 times, and had no reason to believe it was anything but the solemn truth. Her life was a placid stream, flowing predictably between her small hab unit and the cavernous, climate-controlled halls of the archive, a building sunk deep into the moon's crust, shielded from the radiation of the gas giant it orbited. The work was her solace, a connection to a past she could never truly know. One cycle, during a mandated system-wide data migration, she was tasked with decommissioning a pre-Concord server bank from the Founders era, a relic from the first generation of humans born on Epoch. It was a junk job, meant to be a simple wipe and recycle, but the archaic machine fought her. Its code was a labyrinth of forgotten protocols and decaying firewalls. As she delved deeper, trying to force a manual override, her diagnostic tools brushed against something that shouldn't have been there, a partition. Triple encrypted and nested so deep within the server's core programming it was more like a ghost than a file. It wasn't on any manifest. It had no Concord designation. It felt angry. Curiosity, a dangerous and atrophied muscle in Epoch society, twitched within her. For 3 sleepless nights, she worked, coaxing the dead machine with lines of resurrected code, whispering to it in a language no one had spoken for generations. And then it opened. The partition called itself the Ethelred Archive. The name meant nothing to her, but its contents shattered her world. It was a data dump, a final scream from the last free human fleet, compiled in the final hours of a war she never knew had been fought. There was no civil war. There was an invasion. She watched unfiltered fleet recordings, the raw, terrifying footage of conquered dreadnoughts, their hulls sleek and silver like benevolent gods, raining plasma fire on Earth. She saw orbital defense platforms, valiant and hopelessly outmatched, ripped apart. She saw cities she knew only from faded photographs, London, Shanghai, Buenos Aires turned to glass under the silent, indifferent gaze of the Concorde's armada. The audio was a cacophony of dying transmissions, of human captains shouting defiance into the void, of soldiers on the ground describing alien war machines that hunted them through the ruins. The Concorde hadn't come to welcome humanity, they'd come to conquer it, to absorb its unique FTL technology and silence a potential rival before it could gain a foothold in the galaxy. Humanity's crime wasn't hubris, it was refusal. They had refused to kneel. The truth was a poison, seeping into the placid water of her life, turning it black. But the archive held a darker secret still. Buried beneath the records of the slaughter was a theoretical weapons project, humanity's last, desperate gambit. It wasn't a bomb or a plague meant to kill. It was something far more insidious. They called it mnemosyne. It was a cognitive weapon, a viral code designed to attack not flesh or steel, but information itself. Once unleashed into a galactic network, it would replicate, evolve, and hunt for specific cultural and historical data, erasing it with surgical precision. It could wipe the memory of a battle from every archive, every ship's log, every networked mind. It could make a species forget its own name, its gods, its history, leaving behind a hollow shell of a culture ripe for assimilation. The project was incomplete, a ghost of a weapon that was never finished, but the science behind it was all there chilling, elegant, and terrifying. The final component, a key algorithm derived from observing a unique quantum anomaly, was missing. Its location was hinted at in the final, corrupted entry from the archive's creator, a doctor. Eris Thorne, my final work is safe, where memory meets its echo, where the ghost of Orion sings its silent song. The phrase was nonsense, a poet's dying riddle. The moment Ilara's system fully decrypted the mnemosyne files, an invisible tripwire snapped 500 light-years away. In the obsidian heart of the Concorde's intelligence directorate, a single red glyph pulsed on a monitoring console that had been dark for centuries. It was an alert tied to a phantom, a threat the Concorde believed it had scoured from existence. Within the silent edict, the Concorde's most feared and secretive agency, the alert was received by an operative named Kalen. Kalen was a Xylosian, a species whose empathic abilities had been honed by the edict into a tool for interrogation and psychological warfare. He was a true believer, a scalpel wielded in the service of galactic stability. He saw the Concorde's peace not as a lie, but as a necessary or beautiful construct, one that must be protected from dangerous truths. The alert from the human preserve was a discordant note in that perfect symphony. He was dispatched with a single, cold directive: sanitize the source, find the memory, and burn it from the galaxy. Ilara felt the change not as a sudden shock, but as a subtle drop in pressure. The network traffic on Epoch, usually a sluggish, predictable trickle, began to show minute, unusual fluctuations. Diagnostic subroutines she had never seen before, ghost-ping the archive's external ports. They were searching, sniffing the air for the scent of her discovery. They knew. She wasn't a soldier or a spy. She was a librarian. But the Aethelred archive had taught her more in 3 days than Epoch had in a lifetime. It had taught her about paranoia, about survival, about what happened to those who waited for the enemy to knock. She couldn't fight them. She couldn't reason with them. She could only run. With trembling hands, she downloaded the entire Aethelred archive onto a hardened data shard. a dense crystal of memory small enough to hide in her palm. The process was agonizingly slow. Every percentage point that crawled across the screen was a second closer to the arrival of the hunters. She left her HAB unit with nothing but the clothes on her back and the data shard burning a cold spot in her pocket. She made her way to the industrial spaceport, a grimy, chaotic place worlds away from the sterile order of the archives, and booked passage on a freighter, the Stray Dog, an ore hauler making its miserable run to the lawless asteroid belts of the Outer Rim. As the freighter shuddered its way into orbit, its hull groaning in protest, Alara looked out the smeared viewport. A ship, sleek and black as a shard of obsidian, was entering the system, its profile unlike any vessel she had ever seen. It moved with the silent, predatory grace of a shark. It was here for her, below, the quiet moon of Epoch, her home, her prison, her entire world was now nothing more than a target. The freighter's engines flared, and the ship jumped, tearing a hole in space-time and pulling her into the vast, unwelcoming darkness of a galaxy that thought she was extinct. She was no longer Ilara, the archivist. She was a ghost, the last librarian of a murdered world. And she carried the seed of a weapon that could make the galaxy forget there ever was a peace to begin with. The transition from the sterile silence of Epoch to the cacophonous, vibrating belly of the Stray Dog was a brutal assault on Ilara's senses. The air was a thick cocktail of ozone, recycled sweat, and the metallic tang of overworked life support. The ship's frame groaned around her, a constant, weary protest against the stresses of FTL travel. This was a world away from the hushed reverence of the archive. This was a place where things rusted, broke, and were cursed at in a dialect of galactic standard she barely recognized. The crew, a motley collection of humans and aliens whose species she couldn't identify, regarded her with a mixture of disinterest and suspicion. She was too clean, her clothes too uniform, her silence too loud against the backdrop of their gruff camaraderie. She was a ghost at their table, a passenger who paid her fare in untraceable Concorde credits and kept to the shadows of the cramped corridors. Her sanctuary was a small, coffin-like bunk, where she would lie in the darkness, the data shard clutched in her hand, its crystalline structure a cold, solid anchor in the terrifying fluidity of her new life. The truths within it churned in her mind, the silent screams of a burning earth, the cold calculus of the Concorde, the terrifying potential of the Mnemosyne weapon. Vengeance was a foreign concept to her, an emotion she'd only read about in historical texts. What she felt was something deeper, colder, a profound, crushing sense of responsibility. She was the last witness, and the archive was her testimony. Back on Epoch, the sleek, obsidian blade of Kalen's ship, the quiet resolve, slipped through the moon's thin atmosphere without a sound. It did not announce itself. It did not request docking. It simply became present. Kalen disembarked not with a squad of soldiers, but alone. He moved through the orderly corridors of the capital with an unnerving grace, his Zolosian form tall and slender, his presence barely registering to the passive citizens he passed. He did not need to break down doors or interrogate officials. He simply went to the central archive and stood in the decommissioned server room where Ilara's world had ended. For a Zylosian empath trained by the Silent Edict, a place was like a recording. He closed his eyes and breathed in the residual emotional energy. He could taste Ilara's scholarly curiosity curdling into shock, then into the sharp, metallic tang of terror. He felt the ghost of her frantic keystrokes, the cold wave of horror as she watched the Ethelred footage. And, finally, the flinty spark of a newfound resolve. It was this last emotional signature that interested him most. This was not the panicked flight of a common criminal. This was the beginning of a pilgrimage. He interfaced his own datapad with the archive's central network. The Concorde's digital security was a layered, beautiful thing, and he slipped through it like a whisper. Alara's identity unfurled before him, her psychological profile, her work history, her minimal social contacts. He saw her flight booking, a crude, last-minute purchase on a rust bucket freighter bound for the Outer Rim. It was predictable. A cornered animal seeking the deepest part of the forest. But as he traced the digital footprints of her final hours in the archive, he found the faint traces of her search queries, the ghost of her research into the encrypted files. He saw the name Ethelred. He saw the word mnemosyne, and he felt a chill that had nothing to do with the room's climate control. The sanitization protocol was no longer sufficient. This was now a recovery operation. The memory had to be retrieved before it could be planted. He uploaded Ilara's biometrics to every Concord checkpoint and bounty network in the sector, flagging her not as a fugitive, but as a carrier of a lethal info contagion, with a reward for her capture that would make kings out of scavengers. Then, he left Epoch as silently as he had arrived, his ship a sliver of darkness cutting a direct course for the Outer Rim, its engines humming a silent, patient hymn of pursuit. Aboard the stray dog, Alara knew she couldn't remain a passive refugee. The riddle from Dr. Thorne's final entry, where memory meets its echo, where the ghost of Orion sings its silent song, was her only map. It was a lock, and she was a librarian who had spent her life learning how to pick them. She needed access to a deep network terminal, but using one would be like lighting a flare in the dark. She approached the ship's captain, a hulking, scarred human named Jorik, who seemed to be permanently scowling at the universe through a cybernetic left eye. He listened to her request for a private, shielded data link with a cynical grunt. A researcher, huh? His voice was a low rumble, like rocks grinding together. In the Outer Rim, research is what you call it when you're checking the price on your own head. It'll cost you. She paid his exorbitant fee without haggling, the last of her credits, and he led her to a small, shielded alcove behind the engine room. The terminal was old, battered, but its connection was laundered through a dozen illegal relays. For the first time in days, Alara felt a flicker of her old self. She began to dig. The ghost of Orion was a dead end in official Concord charts. But in the pre-Concord archives she accessed through back doors in the network, it was a name spoken with a mix of fear and reverence. It wasn't a place. It was a person. A legendary netrunner and data smuggler from Earth's final years. A man who believed information was a living entity that deserved to be free. He had reportedly died during the invasion, his ship vaporized over Mars. But his call sign, his digital signature, had been Orion's ghost. His song would be his legacy, a piece of code, a hidden broadcast. The first part of the riddle clicked into place. Now for the second, where memory meets its echo. This was archivist terminology. An echo in a data system is a redundant copy, a backup, a ghost image stored for safety. She cross-referenced this concept with known data havens, pirate servers, and black market archives from the pre-Concord era. A single location emerged from the noise, a place that was more myth than reality, The Maelstrom. It was a rogue data haven housed within the core of a hollowed-out asteroid drifting through a notoriously unstable nebula. It was a place where data was king, where smugglers, criminals, and information brokers bought and sold secrets, and where the Concord's authority was a joke. It was a place where memories and their echoes were traded like currency. Dr. Thorne hadn't hidden the key. He had entrusted it to the one man who could keep it safe. And that man had likely stored it in the galaxy's most secure and dangerous library. The stray dog docked at Port Anarchy, a sprawling, chaotic station carved into a massive asteroid, lit by flickering neon and the cold glow of 1,000 illicit deals. It was the last stop before the nebula that housed the Maelstrom. The air smelled of spilled fuel, alien spices, and desperation. Yorick had agreed to take her the rest of the way, his price tripling now that he understood the nature of her destination. "The Maelstrom ain't a place you visit," he'd grumbled. "It's a place you survive." As they were finalizing their deal over a plate of synthetic protein in a noisy cantina, the atmosphere shifted. The low hum of conversation faltered. 2 figures had entered. Their armor, the matte gray of conquered special forces, their faces hidden behind polarized visors. They moved with an efficient, predatory calm that was alien to the chaotic energy of the port. A bounty puck in one of their hands chirped softly, its light blinking in time with Alara's quickening heartbeat. Jorik's cybernetic eye whirred as he zoomed in on the puck, saw her face, and then the staggering number of credits beneath it. He swore under his breath. "Run," he hissed, kicking the table over. The cantina erupted. The 2 hunters opened fire, their pulse rifles firing precise, contained bursts that were terrifyingly professional. Jorik wasn't a hero, but he was a pragmatist, and a firefight on his ship's doorstep was bad for business. He drew his own heavy blaster pistol, laying down a spray of covering fire while grabbing Alara by the arm and dragging her through the panicking crowd. She stumbled, her mind screaming. The sounds of blaster fire and shattering glass, a nightmare made real. This wasn't a historical recording. It was happening to her. They burst out onto the docking ring. The hunters closed behind. Yorick shoved her toward the stray dog's ramp. "Get aboard, now." A searing pain shot through his shoulder as a pulse bolt grazed him. He roared, firing blindly back at their pursuers. Ilara scrambled up the ramp, her heart hammering against her ribs. Yorick followed, sealing the airlock behind them as plasma fire scored the hull. Alarms blared as he slammed the ship's engines to full, ripping the docking clamps from their moorings with a screech of tortured metal. The stray dog lurched out of the station, its battered frame shuddering violently. Yorick collapsed into the pilot's seat, clutching his bleeding shoulder, his face pale. "Their Concord," he gasped, his voice tight with pain and a newfound fury. "Not bounty hunters. That was military. What in the hell did you steal?" Ilara stood in the cockpit, her knuckles white where she gripped a console for support, watching the chaotic lights of Port Anarchy recede. She had brought this violence, this death, into these people's lives. The weight of it was a physical blow. "The truth," she whispered, her voice trembling but clear. She looked at Yorick, whose initial cynicism was now being burned away by the fires of a shared enemy. "I stole the truth." The ship, damaged and bleeding atmosphere from a dozen minor hull breaches, limped away from the port and turned its nose toward the churning, violent clouds of the nebula ahead. The hunt was no longer a distant threat. It had a face and a pulse rifle, and it was right behind them. Their destination was no longer a choice. It was the only hiding place left in a galaxy that wanted her silenced. And the Maelstrom was waiting. The journey into the nebula was a descent into a roiling, chaotic hell. The stray dog, already wounded, protested every light year. The ship's navigational sensors screamed as gravitational tides and pockets of stellar radiation played havoc with its systems. Outside the viewport, the universe was a terrifying canvas of bruised purples and angry reds, punctuated by blinding flashes of lightning that arced between colossal clouds of dust and gas. Yorick, patched up with a liberal application of Medifoam and a steady stream of stimulants, piloted the ship with a grim, focused intensity. The attack at Port Anarchy had changed him. The cynical freighter captain had been replaced by a man nursing a fresh and deeply personal grudge against the Concorde. He now looked at Alara not as a piece of valuable, troublesome cargo, but as the source of a war he hadn't asked for but was now fully committed to fighting. He'd seen conquered sanitization squads before, in the back alleys of forgotten colonies. He knew what they left in their wake. "They don't just want you dead," he'd said, his voice a low rasp as he wrestled with the controls. "They want you erased." Ilara, in turn, found herself transforming. The quiet archivist was being stripped away, layer by layer, by the raw, brutal necessity of survival. She learned to patch a ruptured power conduit under Yorick's barked instructions, the heat from the plasma conduit searing her face. She learned to read the ship's damage control schematics, rerouting power from non-essential systems to bolster the failing shields. The archive in her mind, once filled with historical dates and catalog numbers, was now making room for shield frequencies and engine thrust-to-mass ratios. She was becoming a part of the ship, her fear current running through its damaged veins. They were not alone in the nebula. Twice, Kalen's ship, the Quiet Resolve, appeared on their long-range sensors, a phantom of black metal against the swirling chaos. It didn't fire. It didn't hail them. It simply herded them, its superior speed and technology allowing it to cut off their escape routes, forcing them deeper into the most treacherous, sensor-blinding regions of the nebula. Kalen was not a brute. He was a hunter, and he was enjoying the chase, letting the environment do half the work for him, bleeding his prey of resources and hope. He knew they were heading for the Maelstrom. The Concorde had been trying to infiltrate or destroy the data haven for decades. For him, this was an opportunity to capture the Archivist, recover the Mimosini data, and finally gut the galaxy's most notorious nest of information vipers in a single, elegant stroke. After a grueling week that felt like a lifetime, they saw it. The Maelstrom was not a station, it was a scar. A massive, crystalline asteroid, its core hollowed out and filled with a dizzying, chaotic lattice of habitats, docking bays, and data server farms, all powered by the raw, unstable energy of the nebula itself. Ships swarmed around it like insects, darting through a maelstrom of smaller asteroids and debris that served as a natural and lethal defense shield. There was no central authority, no docking control. Gaining entry was a matter of skill, nerve, and a transponder code that declared you were not, under any circumstances, affiliated with the Concorde. Jorik navigated the final approach with the sweat beading on his forehead, the stray dog groaning as he dodged tumbling rocks and pirate vessels looking for an easy score. They finally slammed into a vacant docking cradle with a jarring shudder. the magnetic clamps engaging with a reluctant, grinding groan. The maelstrom's interior was a vertical city built in defiance of gravity and common sense. Walkways and maglifts crisscrossed a vast central cavern, the air thick with the hum of countless servers and the murmur of 1,000 different languages. Information brokers with data jacks embedded in their skulls haggled with smugglers in dimly lit alcoves, rogue AIs, their holographic avatars flickering, offered forbidden knowledge for a price. This was the beating heart of the Galactic Underground, a place where the Concord's carefully curated history was just one more commodity to be bought, sold, or rewritten. Elara and Yorich, hooded and anonymous, made their way through the throng. The Maelstrom's inhabitants were a gallery of the galaxy's forgotten and forsaken. Humans were a rare sight here, a species most believed had faded into myth. They drew curious, sometimes hostile stares. Elara's mission was singular: find the echo of Orion's ghost. According to the fragmented data she'd managed to pull, the ghost's digital legacy was maintained by an enigmatic information broker known only as the Curator. Finding the Curator in a place like the Maelstrom was like finding a specific grain of sand in a hurricane. They started in the data dens, paying exorbitant fees in laundered credits for slivers of information. The trail was cold, layered with dead ends and false leads left by a master of digital misdirection. Days bled into one another. Their resources dwindled. The pressure was immense. Elara knew Kalen would not be far behind. He wouldn't risk a direct assault on the Maelstrom, but he would find a way in. A crack in its defenses to exploit. Finally, they got a break. A wizened old alien, a being whose body seemed to be made of knotted wires and blinking diodes, recognized the name Ethelred. He told them the Curator didn't deal in credits. He dealt in memories. To gain an audience, one had to offer a piece of information, a memory, that the Curator did not already possess. It had to be unique, valuable, and true. Elara knew what she had to do. She had the ultimate offering, the truth of Earth. Using a secure terminal, she sent a single, encrypted packet into the Maelstrom's chaotic network, addressed to the Curator. The packet contained one thing: a 2-second, unedited clip from the Ethelred archive, showing a Concorde battlecruiser firing on a civilian medical transport over the skies of a burning city. The subject line of her message was simple: "I have the rest." The response was almost instantaneous. A set of coordinates appeared on her screen, a location deep in the oldest, most restricted part of the asteroid. No other words. Jorik insisted on coming with her. "Whatever this is," he said, checking the charge on his blaster. "We see it through." The coordinates led them to a decommissioned server farm, a silent cathedral of dead machines. In the center of the cavernous room, a single figure sat before a bank of ancient, flickering monitors. The Curator was human. He was old, impossibly old, his skin a road map of wrinkles, his body frail and augmented with a web of cybernetics that seemed to be the only thing holding him together. His eyes, however, were sharp and luminous, burning with a fierce, ancient intelligence. He turned as they approached, his gaze locking onto Elara. "I am Aris Thorn," he said, his voice a dry whisper, synthesized through a vocalizer but carrying the weight of centuries. "I have been waiting for you and child." Elara stared, her mind reeling. Dr. Aris Thorn, the creator of the Ethelstrom archive, the man who had designed the Nemazene weapon, the ghost of Orion. He wasn't dead. He had been here, all this time, a ghost in the machine, guarding his creation. You can't be, she stammered. The invasion was 500 years ago. Thorn gave a faint, bitter smile. The Maelstrom is kind to those who know how to edit its logs, and life extension technology was one of humanity's few true masteries. He gestured to the data shard in her hand. You carry my life's work, my greatest triumph, and my most profound failure. You brought the key to its lock. He explained that the Namazana weapon was never completed because he'd had a crisis of conscience. He had designed a weapon to erase memory, but in doing so, he realized he would be committing the same sin as the Concord, the murder of truth. So he fractured the final algorithm, the key, into countless pieces and scattered them throughout the pre-conquered deep network, hidden within fragments of art, music, and literature, a treasure hunt for a ghost. The algorithm wasn't a thing to be found, it was a thing to be reassembled. And the map to reassembling it was his own biometric signature, his living memory. But why? Alara asked, her voice filled with the confusion and exhaustion of her long flight. Why not release the truth? Why hide? Because the galaxy was not ready, Thorn rasped. To release the truth then would have only guaranteed the Conquered would hunt down and exterminate every last human survivor out of fear. I built this place, this library of whispers, to wait, to preserve the echo of our memory until someone was strong enough to make it heard. At that moment, a klaxon blared through the maelstrom. Red alert lights bathed the server farm in a blood-red glow. On one of Thorn's monitors, security feeds showed chaos erupting at the docking bays. Concord assault ships, small, deadly, and using stolen transponder codes, were disgorging elite Xylosian operatives the Silent Edict into the station. They moved with terrifying speed and precision, bypassing local security. Their target clear. Kalen had found his crack. He hadn't attacked the maelstrom. He had infiltrated it. He's here, Thorn whispered, his ancient eyes filled with a weary resignation. He followed your scent. Child. He has come to finish his work. The old man looked at Ilara, his gaze intense. The choice is now yours. We can let the memory die with me, and your people can continue to live in the quiet peace of a lie. Or we can unleash the weapon, not to erase them, but to force them to remember everything, to show the galaxy the price of their tranquility. Outside, the sounds of methodical, professional slaughter grew closer. The maelstrom, the galaxy's impregnable fortress of secrets, was burning. The wail of the klaxons was a death knell. Through the flickering security feeds, Ilara watched Kalen's Silent Edict operatives move through the maelstrom, not with the chaotic fury of invaders, but with the cold, inexorable precision of surgeons. They ignored the station's mercenaries and pirate gangs, flowing around pockets of resistance like water around stones, their objective singular and unwavering. They were cutting a direct path to the old server farm. They are Xylosian, Thorn said, his voice a low, urgent hum. Their empathic abilities allow them to sense intent, to feel the emotional resonance of their target. They are tracking your fear, your resolve. They are tracking the memory you carry. Jorik stepped forward, his blaster held ready, his face a mask of grim determination. We can't outrun them, and we can't fight them. Not here, not a dozen of them. He looked from the frail old man to the terrified but resolute archivist. So what's the plan? Ghost? Thorn's ancient eyes didn't waver from Ilara's. "The plan has not changed in 500 years," he said. He tapped a sequence of commands into his console, and a section of the floor hissed open, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside, nestled in a soft magnetic containment field, was a device that looked like a fusion of organic matter and crystalline technology. It was a synaptic interface crown, a halo of woven filaments and softly glowing diodes. "This is the amplifier," Thorn explained. "Mnemosyne requires a living, human mind to act as a catalyst, a librarian to guide its initial deployment. The final algorithm is not a piece of code to be downloaded. It must be lived." He looked at Ilara, the weight of his next words settling on them like a shroud. "To activate the weapon, you must interface with my memories. You must witness the fall of Earth not as a recording, but as I did. You will feel everything: the hope, the defiance, the fire, the silence. The algorithm is woven into the very fabric of that experience. Once you have it, you can use the Maelstrom's central broadcast antenna to upload the virus into the Concord's network." The sounds of methodical blaster fire were getting closer, punctuated by the strange, harmonic shriek of dying alien vocal cords. They had minutes, perhaps seconds. The choice was brutal in its simplicity: to unleash a weapon that could shatter the minds of trillions. She would have to sacrifice a part of her own. "Do it," Ilara said, her voice steady, the archivist in her replaced completely by the survivor. Jorik gave her a single, sharp nod of understanding. He turned and began barricading the entrance to the server farm with fallen server racks, his actions a clear statement he was buying her the time. Ilara sat, and Thorn gently placed the synaptic crown on her head. The filaments seemed to writhe for a moment, then burrowed into her temples with a sharp, cold sting. "The Conquered believes peace is the absence of conflict," Thorn whispered, his hand on her shoulder. "But true peace is the presence of truth, no matter how painful. Show them the truth, Ilara." He initiated the sequence. Ilara's world dissolved. She was no longer in a server farm in a chaotic nebula. She was on the command deck of the FSV Ethelred, the flagship of Earth's defense fleet, 500 years in the past. She was Aris Thorn, a young, brilliant scientist watching his world die. She saw the Concord fleet arrive, not as monsters, but as elegant, silver angels of death. She felt a collective shock and disbelief of humanity as the first salvo struck Luna Base without warning. She felt the searing rage and desperate courage of the human fleet as they charged into a battle they knew they could not win. The memories were not passive. They were a torrent, a sensory flood. She tasted the ozone in the air from a ruptured plasma conduit. She felt the deck shudder beneath her feet as the ship's kinetic barriers failed. She heard the voice of her captain, a woman named Ava Rostova, giving the final, defiant order to ram the Concord's command ship. She felt Thorn's own hands flying across a console, not fighting, but recording, desperately trying to save a final or indelible record of their existence, building the archive that would one day become his life's prison. She saw cities turn to molten glass, oceans boil away, and a sky once blue turn to a permanent, sickly orange. She felt the profound, soul-crushing grief of a man watching everything he had ever known or loved burn. And woven through it all, a brilliant, complex latticework of code, was the algorithm the key to Mnemosyne, born not of mathematics, but of pain. She came back to herself with a gasp, the server farm seeming unreal, a pale imitation of the vivid hell she had just endured. Tears streamed down her face, but they were not her own. They belonged to Eris Thorn. The synaptic crown glowed with a fierce, white light. The algorithm was hers. Thorn had slumped in his chair, the life force seemingly drained from him, the transfer having taken its final toll. He was pale, his breathing shallow. "It is done," he rasped. At the barricaded entrance, an explosion rocked the room, sending Yorick flying. A section of the makeshift wall vaporized, and through the smoking gaps stepped Kalen. He was not flanked by his operatives. He was alone. His face, a smooth, elegant canvas of gray skin and dark, intelligent eyes, was calm. He held a small, sophisticated pulse pistol, but he did not raise it. His Xylosian senses were overwhelmed by the emotional torrent in the room. He could feel Alara's raw, second-hand grief. He could feel Thorn's fading life. He could feel the terrible, vibrant presence of the weapon she now held in her mind. "Archivist," Kalen said, his voice surprisingly soft, almost hypnotic. "You are holding a weapon that will not liberate the galaxy. It will lobotomize it. You speak of truth, but what you are about to unleash is chaos, a plague of forgetting that will lead to more war, more suffering. The Conquered's peace may be imperfect, but it is peace." "It's a lie," Alara shot back, her voice raw, empowered by the memories she now carried. "It's a beautifully decorated cage, and the bars are made of my people's bones. You didn't come for peace. You came because you are afraid. You are afraid of a history you can't control." Kalen took a step forward. "I am here to prevent a catastrophe. Give me the algorithm. We will expose the truth about Earth, but we will do it our way. Through reforms. Through a controlled release of information. We will not set the galaxy on fire." "Your reforms are just another form of control," Ilar retorted, moving towards the main broadcast console. "You would redact the truth until it suited your narrative. That ends now." From the floor, Jorik groaned, stirring. He raised his blaster on a trembling arm, but Kalen was faster. A single, precise shot from his pistol, and Jorik's weapon clattered to the floor, his hand numbed and useless. Kalen's calm finally broke. His eyes hardened. "I will not allow it." He raised his pistol, aiming it not at Alara, but at the chest of Eris Thorn. "The weapon requires a human catalyst. You are the only one left. But the data you carry is linked to his living memory. If he dies, the connection might be severed. The algorithm might decay before you can upload it. Cease now, or the last true ghost of Orion will sing his final song." Alara froze, her hand hovering over the broadcast command. A standoff. The fate of the galaxy resting not on a battle between fleets, but on a silent, desperate choice in a dusty, forgotten room. Thorn, seeming to gather the last of his strength, looked at her. A faint Jad smile touched his lips. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of his head. He was telling her it didn't matter. The memory was no longer his. It was hers. It was humanity's. Jorik, struggling to his feet, saw the look in Thorn's eyes, saw the cold resolve in Kalen's, and saw Alara's impossible choice. "Kid," he coughed, his voice strained. "Sometimes you can't save the book. You just have to make sure everyone gets to read the last chapter. It wasn't a plan. It was permission." Ilara closed her eyes, shutting out Kalen's threat, shutting out the dying old man and her wounded friend. She focused on the memory of Eva Rustova, the captain of the Ethelred, her face illuminated by the light of a dying star as she gave her final order, defiance. That was the final piece of the algorithm. Not grief, not anger, defiance. She slammed her hand down on the console. The world did not end with a bang, but with a song. As Ilara's hand struck the console, the synaptic crown on her head flared with a light that was not of the physical world. It was the color of memory, of grief, of 500 years of silent, defiant truth. The broadcast antenna atop the maelstrom, designed to pirate entertainment feeds and sell state secrets, became a tuning fork for history itself. A low, subharmonic hum filled the server farm, a sound that was felt in the teeth and bones before it was ever heard. A countdown didn't flash on the screen. There was no time. The upload was instantaneous. A single on its compressed burst of absolute truth fired into the heart of the Concord's galactic network. Kalen, his face a mask of cold duty, flinched. The threat he'd made, the life of Eris Thorn, was now meaningless. He had a microsecond to act, to pull the trigger and commit a final, pointless murder in the name of a peace that was already dead. But he hesitated. In that sliver of a moment, his professional certainty warred with his empathic nature. He could feel the sheer, overwhelming integrity of the memory Ilara was about to unleash, and it paralyzed him. That hesitation was all Yorick needed. With a roar of pure, desperate rage, he launched himself not at Kalen, but at the main power conduit feeding Thorn's console array. He slammed his body into the thick, armored cabling, his shoulder taking the brunt of the impact. Sparks erupted in a blinding shower. The lights in the server farm flickered violently, and a wave of raw energy threw Yorick back like a rag doll. Kalen, his aim thrown off by the power surge and his own internal conflict, fired. The pulse bolt went wide of Thorn, striking the ancient console and vaporizing a piece of humanity's oldest, saddest history. And then the song hit, for Ilara, who was at its epicenter. It was a release the pain of Thorn's memories flowing out of her, no longer a burden, but a broadcast. For Kalen, it was an execution of the soul. As a Xylosian empath, he didn't just hear the song, he became it. The fire of Earth's skies burned behind his eyes. The screams of the dying echoed in his own throat. The cold, clipped orders of the Concord commanders, his predecessors, his mentors, were spoken in his own voice. He felt the lie he had dedicated his life to upholding collapse not as a political reality, but as a visceral, personal sin. He dropped his pistol and fell to his knees, his hands clutching his head, a single, agonized sob escaping his lips. He was no longer a scalpel of the Concord. He was a witness. Across the galaxy, the effect was catastrophic and profound. The Namazan virus was not a crude instrument of erasure. It was a weapon of perfect, terrible clarity. It didn't destroy data. It contextualized it. On the bridge of the Concord flagship Tranquility, the captain watched in horror as his navigational charts flickered. The name of a pacified world, Xylos, was momentarily replaced by a pre-Concord designation, its history of forced assimilation and cultural rewriting scrolling across the screen. On a Varnic trading station, Financial records showing profits from a mining operation on a barren moon suddenly displayed the casualty logs from the indigenous population that had been quietly exterminated to secure the claim. The Concord's network, its greatest tool of control, began to tell the truth. Every redacted file, every sanitized report, every political assassination disguised as an accident, it all came flooding back, appended to the official records like a ghost's furious annotations. And at the heart of it all was the Ethelred archive. The footage of Earth's final moments didn't just play on public screens. It embedded itself in military servers, in diplomatic communiques, in the personal logs of every Concord official. It was a permanent, undeletable scar. The peace shattered. Fleets refused orders. Systems declared secession. The carefully constructed harmony of the Concord, built on 5 centuries of silent lies, collapsed into a cacophony of outrage and civil war within a matter of hours. In the quiet chaos of the server farm, Eris Thorn drew a final, rattling breath. The light had faded from his ancient eyes, but he looked at Alara with a serene finality. "The library is now open," he whispered, and then was still. The ghost of Orion was finally at rest. The maelstrom was tearing itself apart. The Concord forces, their command structure severed and their minds reeling with a truth they couldn't process, were either fighting each other or fleeing in disarray. Yorick, his arm badly burned but his spirit blazing, helped Alara to her feet. They looked at the kneeling, broken form of Kalen. "What about him?" Jorik grunted. Alara looked at the Xylosian, seeing not an enemy, but the first convert of her new truth. "He comes with us," she said. "He has more to remember than anyone." They fought their way out, not against a disciplined army, but through a riot of confusion and fear. They made it back to the stray dog, its hull scarred but its engine still alive, as they blasted free from the dying asteroid, leaving the chaos of the maelstrom behind them. They were just 3 survivors in a galaxy that was now on fire. In the years that followed, the Conquer did not simply fall, it dissolved. In its place rose a dozen new factions, alliances, and bitter rivalries. The galaxy was louder, more dangerous, and infinitely more honest. The story of Alara, the last archivist, became a new kind of myth. She never sought power, never led an army. With Jorik as her steadfast captain and Kalen as her unlikely, penitent advisor, she took the stray dog rechristened the Echo and began a new mission. They traveled the fractured galaxy, not as warriors, but as librarians. They sought out the lost histories the Concord had suppressed, the stories of other species, other rebellions, other truths. They became a neutral ground, a vessel of pure information in a galaxy rebuilding itself on a foundation of painful memory. Kalen, using his knowledge of the Silent Edicts network, helped them uncover countless lies, his every action a quiet atonement. Alara learned that her weapon had not just been a tool of vengeance, it had been a key. It hadn't brought peace, but it had made true peace possible by forcing the galaxy to confront the ugliness of its own past. From the cockpit of the Echo, looking out at a star-dusted sky that no longer hid its secrets, Alara would often hold the cool, inert data shard of the Ethelred archive. She was no longer a keeper of curated dust, but the first librarian of a new age. An age built not on the ashes of forgotten worlds, but on the enduring, defiant power of their memory. The galaxy was in chaos. But for the first time in 500 years, it was free to write its own story. The library was open, and the galaxy had finally begun to read.